Let's go to the Daas Tevunos. We're on page Samach Beis in the Friedlander print, which is paragraph 76 in those who are using the translation. I involve 76, page Samach Beis. Omar Seichel. Remember, this discussion that started several weeks ago was, let's understand man. Man is the tachlis of all the creation. Let's understand man. And the question of man became threefold. Man's existence, the deeds that man performs in his life, and what are the fruits of his labor of those deeds. Ramchal, because of his logic system, went to the last question. What are the deeds? What are the fruits of labor of a man's deeds? And that we get into the discussion of Tchias HaMeisim, of the guf that has Eitz Hadas Tov Ra in it, the Olam HaNeshamas Gan Eden, and the Tchias HaMeisim, the guf and the neshama come back together at the 80 watts, 100 watts, 120 watts, all the examples we gave. So the Ramchal has dealt with the last question. What are the fruits of man's labor? The fruit of man's labor is Tchias HaMeisim. And Tchias HaMeisim, you get there because the neshama is working on purifying the guf, and that's the whole tachlis for which the neshama came to the world, to purify the guf and lift up the guf. And in order to lift up the guf, the Baruch Shalom gave the neshama tools called Torah mitzvahs. That's basically, in very summary format, the answer to question 3. What is the fruit of man's labor? We still have the first 2 questions. First 2 questions are man's very existence and the deeds, the deeds that he does during his lifetime. So the Seichel is now reminding the neshama where we're up to. Amar Seichel. After sheyadanu metzias ha'odem v'inyanoi bein b'neshmasai bein b'gufai b'chilef ha'itne v'seidu azmanim shehu chakloi. Now that you understand the interaction between the guf and the neshama during different times, or Friedlander in footnote 145 explains the 3 periods of time. Olam Hazeh, we've explained interactions between the guf and the neshama in this world, where the neshama is working on purifying the guf that's infected with the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, and the neshama cannot finish the job in this world. We talked about the body decomposes back into Offer, releases the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, etc. So we learned about the interaction of guf and neshama in Olam Hazeh. Second, Acharei HaMavis, after death, the guf decomposes in the ground to accomplish getting rid of Eitz Hadas Tov Ra infection. And the neshama goes to the Olam HaNeshamas, where it can rejuvenate and go back to its original wattage and even get an increase in wattage. And it's a place where it can rest before Tchias HaMeisim. Third, Ubezman Atchil, and the interaction between the guf and the neshama at Tchias HaMeisim. So there's the guf and the neshama in this world, the guf and the neshama at death, and the guf and the neshama at Tchias HaMeisim, and those are the 3 periods of time, and we discussed those. Now, now we're going to go into how the Ribono Shel Olam is misnaheg, how he supervises, for lack of a better word, the hanhaga. That's a very important word, because the Sefer Das Tevunos is about hanhaga, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu supervises and watches over the world. And remember the 4 questions that the neshama had for the Sefer at the very beginning of the Sefer. The neshama said to the Sefer, I believe in the 39 Imamids, and I understand 9 of them rationally, but 4 of them, I don't understand how they work. I don't understand Hashgacha, I don't understand Schava Onesh, I don't understand Bias Mashiach, and I don't understand Tchias HaMeisim. And the first 2, the Seichel said, what do you find difficulty with Hashgacha and Schava Onesh? And the neshama said, because it's Olam Hapuch. If I look outside, it doesn't look like there's anyone watching this place. And certainly if no one's watching the place, it looks like there's no reward and punishment. Good guys not doing so well all the time, and the bad guys seem to be doing fine most of the time. So I don't see this hashgacha and this schar v'onesh. I believe it, but I cannot explain to someone rationally how there is hashgacha and schar v'onesh. So therefore, we need to understand the way the Rebbeinu Shalom is manik ha'olam. How is he supervising the world? Where is the hashgacha by which he supervises the world? Where is the reward and punishment based upon the supervision of the world? So now the Ramchal is coming to those basic, those questions. I need to understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with or supervises the bein be'ilin guf or bein l'nishmasai. How HaKadosh Baruch Hu supervises the guf. How HaKadosh Baruch Hu supervises the neshama during these periods of time. And Friedland in footnote 146 says, Mahim protei ha'anhaga sh'HaKadosh Baruch Hu misnayim aguf. How does God, what's his hanhaga, midas hanhaga? How does he supervise? How does he deal with the guf? How does he deal with the neshama? And certainly how does he deal in interacting the two together? And there are all kinds of hanhagas that we're going to learn about. Amra Hanashama, Ayin Zayin, Haseder Hogun Vade, this order that we're using to explain man is fine. He called over Sarach Shiam Yusham al Afnav Bemkomo B'Shaitoi, because everything that you're going to think through has to be in the proper place, in the proper time, it has to be in an organized fashion. We've done man at Tchias HaMesim, what the purpose of Tchias HaMesim is, the Guf and the Neshama. And now let's go back to man. The guf and the neshama, where was it created from? How does HaKadosh Baruch Hu deal with them? Ata hashlei nostarech, and now complete this discussion, please. Before we begin, Ayin Ches, a concept. We say in Pasuk in Tehillim, Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Yem Hashem shloyakeka v'yabrech b'layla. Hashem yishmor b'koloi yishmos nafshech. Hashem yishmor tzeis v'yach mi'ata v'yat v'yla. We say this kapitel Tehillim many times, and Shir Amala says to Ein Alahor. It says Hashem tzilcha. God is your shadow. Shadow also is meant in this context, the Mefarshim tell us. It's just like when you're creating a shadow, whatever you do, your shadow copies you. You pick up your hand, your shadow will pick up its hand. You twiddle your fingers, the shadow will twiddle its fingers. Hashem Tzilcha means God is a reflection of you. God is going to act as a mirror image of the way you act and the way you conduct yourself. So many weeks ago, probably months by now, when we started learning Daas Tevunos, we talked about the idea that although everybody knows and everybody said God runs the world, no question about that, God runs the world, but the basis upon which God runs the world is how we conduct ourselves. When we conduct our affairs, there's a mirror image that God conducts the affairs of the world based upon how we conduct our affairs. So there's the idea of Tselem Elokim is also an idea that a person is some kind of Tselem of God, to the extent that his conduct is going to be reflected in the way God runs the world. This is also something discussed in the Nefesh HaChaim about Tselem Elokim, what Tselem Elokim means. And Tselem Elokim is an unbelievable power. It's the power of man to do things, and through those things that he does or doesn't do, God becomes a mirror image of what we do. So yes, God runs the world, but he's looking at how we conduct our affairs and decides accordingly how to conduct the world. So when we say in Tehillim, Hashem Tzilcha, God is your shadow, when you twiddle your fingers, there's going to be a hanhaga, a way that God's going to supervise your life and supervise the world, which is going to be called twiddle finger. Because I just twiddle finger. Now there's going to be a hanhaga called twiddle finger. Now they're going to be specific terms of art for this hanhaga. I'm just using as an example, the way we conduct our affairs is going to be a shadow from the Ribono Shel Olam coming back and giving us a mirror image, or as they say, you're going to sleep in the bed you make. You twiddle your fingers, you're going to get back twiddle fingers. Some people like to call this mida keneged mida. But we're going to see this in a much greater depth instead of just quote unquote sayings, mida keneged mida. As we always say, this is a highly technical sefer. The sefer is based upon, can we understand this? That's where the whole sefer began, as we said just a few moments ago. The neshama wants to understand beyond just believing. So to say that it's mida keneged mida, okay, now move on. But if you want to understand this, this is what the next discussion is going to be about. And this is first step in Hanhaga. How does God supervise the world? We decide. Ayin Ches, paragraph Ayin Ches, 78. Amar HaSeichel, Re'i, Yesh ha'atzomim ha'gashmim v'ha'atzomim ha'ruchnim. There's the atzomim, there's the essence, there's the creation that is gashmi, it's physical. And then there's the essence, there's a creation that's completely spiritual. And you yourself see the great difference between these two types of elements. There's the element of physicality and the element of spirituality. There's ruchnius and gashmius. When you compare the pure physical existence, the pure physical element, to the pure ruchnius element, you're dealing, the physical is much, much lower level than the ruchnius. The ruchnius element is very prestigious and very honored, very elevated. And you understand, and you've seen, and we've discussed this already, how much light there is in the element called ruchnius, and how much darkness and density and imperfection there is in the physicality. Therefore, we have two types of creations. We have a creation that's full of light, and it's full of hashpah. It wants to give. It wants to give. The neshama is a giver. What's the tachlis of the neshama? It came to this world in a state which is already perfect, although it can get to higher levels of perfection as we've learned. But it came to the world to perfect the guf. It came to be mashpia on the guf. The neshama is inherently a giver. It's not looking to receive. The neshama is a giving element in the person. It wants to give. And the ultimate giving is the ultimate gift of perfecting something else. That's what Rav Friedlander explained in footnote 20 at the bottom of page Samach that we read last week, that the same way in the system of the perfectly imperfect world, which we need to perfect, and the goal of that system is hatova. Again, we said yichud, we're going to discuss hatova and yichud, put it together. The goal for us is in the system to be meitiv, to perfect that which is imperfect. So we want to perfect an imperfectly perfect world, a perfectly imperfect world. And this is what the neshama is doing. The neshama came to the guf to perfect the perfectly imperfect guf. And in that way, it's meitiv, it's doing good. The neshama is a giver. It wants to do good. And it wants to do good with its own body. It wants to elevate the body. You have many times an element of jealousy. People who are on a higher level, they don't want to see other people becoming bigger than them. They want a monopoly on greatness. There are people who have vast amounts of knowledge. and they seem to have difficulty finding time sharing that knowledge for different reasons. And sometimes they simply don't want to share the knowledge because they're not interested in making anyone as big or even greater than them. There's this element of kinna, and the Gemara calls it in a positive way. It can be used in a positive way. Kinna soifrim tar b'chachma, the jealousy amongst sofrim, the jealousy amongst people who study tar b'chachma. Kinna soifrim tar b'chachma. It's sometimes an engine to make people want to learn more because they want to learn more and know more than the next person. How do you use that for the good? Yeh Mashiach. It's a discussion in the Mesilas Yesharim when he talks about kolecha nichra mechupasi shel chaveroi. But the Gemara says kinna soifrim tar b'chachma. There's a way to use kinna for a good thing, and maybe we'll tie that into something we'll read today in Rav Kook. But there's sometimes an inherent jealousy where you have something, you don't want the other person to have the same thing, or you have a certain prestige. You don't want anyone to overcome you, overtake you. You want to be number one. You're not interested in him becoming number one and you becoming number two. You're not interested in being Avis, who always tries harder. You want to always be number one. People like that. The neshama is not like that. The neshama in a person is a pure giver. It wants to give. It wants to give to the guf and perfect the guf. But why are you lifting up the guf? If you lift up the guf, it'll maybe become almost as great or maybe as great as you at Chiyas HaMesim. It's Beseder with the neshama. Neshama is hashpa'ah miravachas. The Rebbeinu Shalom created the neshama with a tremendous amount of light. What does light do? It lights up the whole area. That's what light does. It lights up the area for the benefit of people. And Ruchnius is a light that benefits the person. A person can light up other people. He can light up a whole community. He can light up a whole world. And this is done because the neshama is a light-giving source. And light-giving sources want to give. They want to benefit others. The neshama is a giver. That's one creation the Rosh Shalom made. The neshama. Ubriya b'ha'ora mu'etes, and there's another creation which we call the physical guf, and there's very little light in it. It's basically dust of the earth, but it has some light in it. V'hashpa'a mu'etes, and very little hashpa. What is really the guf? Guf wants. The guf wants this, and the guf wants that. The guf is a taker. It's not a giver. To the extent that the hand takes money and puts it in the hands of another human being who needs it, that's because neshama is directing the guf. Take your hand and become a giver. The hand becomes a giver because neshama is directing it to give. The neshama is a giver. The physical body is a taker. The neshama can convert the body and elevate the body to be a giver. Give of yourself, give of your time. That's neshama directing the body. If the neshama is not directing the body, what you have is a person who's a taker. He's always taking and doesn't give back. He's a taker. It's all about him. Can have this conversation for hours about the generation of the selfie, the generation of a car that has on the side of it the name of the car. You've probably seen it on the streets. The name of the car is Ami, M-I-I, not M-E, M-I-I, Ami. And on the side of the car, it says, it's all about M-I-I. It's all about me. And people, people actually buy this car. And they drive the car and they park it. And people see you getting out of the car, whether, I don't know, you have to be down the kafschus, maybe it's a rental. But why would somebody buy a car that says, it's all about me? It's not all about you. I'm sorry to disappoint you. The whole world is not about you. So when we see these kind of things, the selfie, magiali, I want, I deserve, me, we're talking about a destruction of the ruchnius of the neshama. The guf has taken over the neshama. The guf has now taken the neshama and said, forget it. I am a taker. I'm not going to be a giver. I want, give me. I want, I deserve. I want, and I want it now. And we can see this in children. Before the neshama and their ruchnius develops, they takers. They want. They want. I want it and I want it now. I want and I want it now. And the greatest yesod in chinuch is to teach children how to not always take, but to understand. We always talk about this with children. Are you ready to share? Why is sharing such an important concept when you're being mechanech young children? Because sharing means you're being mechanech the neshama. It's not all about you, and it's not all for you, and I know you want it now, but we're going to share. We're going to share. You're going to become, we're going to start the process of making you understand that you give, and you just don't always take. So Rosh Hashanah created these two distinct parts of the human being. The neshama, which is full of light, that lights up an area for everyone's benefit, and it wants to give, and it wants to give to the guf and perfect the guf. And the guf is basically a little light with a lot of imperfections, and it's always wants, and I want it, and I want it, and it's about me, and it's a selfie, and I want it now, and that's the guf. Neshama is trying to redirect the guf to understand that the tachlis of life is not to be a taker. The tachlis of life is to be a giver, whether it's a giver of time, a giver of knowledge, a giver of money. Whatever it is, the tachlis, the neshama is trying to change the guf to be a mashpia. Ushtei midos elu, and these two different midos, giving and taking, midas habriya b'ha'ora, the midah of that we have in the bria. This is now a midah, right? I said that the neshama is a light that wants to give. That's a midah. That's a trait. I want to give. And then the guf is dense, dark, a little light, but it's a taker. That's a midah. It's a trait. And now that we have these two traits in the world, the trait of ruchnius, light that wants to give, the trait of the guf that doesn't have much light and only wants to take, midas ha'ora. So where does this trait come from, this trait of light that wants to give? Where did this come from? Mitoldas chak tuva. This came from the Ribono Shel Olam's chak tuva. The Ribono Shel Olam itself is a creation. We talked about that in the shape of the Sefer Mechok of the Hatov is to be made. God made this rule. He made this concept that good means to give to others. It didn't have to be like that. We gave the ludicrous example, and it is ludicrous, but it's ludicrous because we can't imagine such a thing. God could have put into the Bria an idea. The same way God created zebras and turtles and flowers, God created ideas. God could have made the idea that a person that wears brown shoes is a good person. And it would have been some kind of Yetzer Hara. Don't put on brown shoes. You shouldn't buy brown shoes. Revolutions against brown shoes. And a person builds up the courage to wear brown shoes, a good person. Instead, the Rosh Hashanah made the rule that the way that goodness is defined as giving to others. Me'achok le'heitiv. To be native to others. So where did this neshama come from? This neshama that wants to be mashpia and wants to give came from chak tuva. It came from the Ribono Shel Olam's rule, lahetiv. Umidas habriya below ha'ora, and the physical guf that doesn't have that kind of light and is not a great mashpia at all. In fact, it's a taker, not a giver. Mitoldos helim tuvo. It's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not reveal his Torah. What does it mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not reveal his Torah? Our Friedlander in footnote 147 says, Midas tuvoi pola babrias haneshama. God's midah, quote unquote. When we say this again, we have to give that introduction. God is not angry, he's not happy, he's not sad. When we talk about these things, we're talking about not God's essential existence. We're not allowed to talk about that. But there's a midah that God created, a tool that God created, and he used the tool of toiv to create the neshama. The footnote continues on page Sam Gimel. Ulum haguf nivra ayidei helam tuvay. The body was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of withdrawing or hiding that goodness. How do you do that? Hainu ayidei tzimtzum ha'ashba. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mitzamtzem. He constricted the time. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to create neshama, he did it through his rule of Hatava. And that rule of Hatava is an immense amount of light. And now you have a neshama that's a giver. It's light force. It lights up. It gives. And that's the neshama. When the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted to create the second component part of a human being, which is the guf, HaKadosh Baruch Hu constricted that light. Just the way when he created the world, we talk about it tzimtzum. That's the larger world. But then when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man, there was also a tzimtzum. Man was created, his guf was created through a tzimtzum ha'or. We're going to constrict the light, so there's not going to be much light in this dust of the earth. God created the dust of the earth also. Same way God created the neshama, God created the dust of the earth. So why doesn't the dust of the earth have as much light in it as the neshama? Why is the dust of the earth dense, thick, weighty, heavy? We talk about light, my footnote has a mimer on this. We talk about light, light's supposed to be. I don't keep up with physics. But light was at one time, maybe it still is today, the fastest thing, 186,000 miles per second, I believe. There's nothing faster than light. Speed of light. On the other hand, light that moves so quickly, when you talk about dust, you're talking about something that's heavy and doesn't move that quickly. And these are two different things. One is, and that's when we talk about neshama, we talk about or. It's a light. Not only does it move, not only does it shine and benefit everyone around it, it also moves quickly with its rizus. On the other hand, the offer, the dust of the earth, is dense, it's heavy, and we feel this in our bodies. Our bodies have weight, they have a mass. Neshama doesn't have a mass, it's pure ruchnius. So, Rav Friedlander says, now, the Rebbeinu Shalom created the neshama and he created the guf. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu created both, then how did the dust become heavy, dense, and why is the neshama so light and fast? The answer is because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the neshama, he created mechak tuva from his the rule he created about tov, from the tool of tov, and from the tool of tov, boom, there was this beautiful, wonderful light in both ways. It's light in the sense that it lightens up things, and light in the sense of weight. It doesn't have any weight. It's purely ruchnius. On the other hand, when God created the guf, he constricted, there was a tzimtzum of that tov, of that or, and now with the or being constricted and not much of that or going into this thing called earth, the earth ends up being dense, dark, and heavy because there's not as much ore. How is there not as much ore in the dust of the earth? It's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu constricted the light when he created it. So we have two things. We have the guf that is a creation of a tzimtzum, and on the other hand, we have the neshama, which really isn't subject to, quote unquote, this concept of tzimtzum relative to the guf. Vitiri, back to page 62, and you will see Ki Ruchniim Kol Iskam B'Divrei Kedusha. The spiritual part of a person, the ruchnius of a person, is always going to be involved and interested in acts of holiness. Achagashmiyim, however, the physical part of the human being, the body, Inyanem Inyan Chol, they're interested in the mundane. The body is interested in the mundane. The body without the neshama is just wants mundane. With Rom Shvalim and Nidism. And low type of things, all the bodily desires. Now, of course, one of the places, perhaps one of the most important places, where Judaism parts ways theologically with Catholicism, is Catholicism never learned the most important lesson that we just learned for the last couple of weeks in Daas. The neshama came into the guf to lift up the guf and make it a holier thing. And the Catholics just don't get that. They never will. And therefore, to be a holy man in the Catholic Church, you don't get married. You don't indulge the physical body. And therefore, the Catholic Church, because they've done something that's completely opposite of man's nature. Man was born with the nature to desire a woman was born with the nature to desire a man. Now, Cook talks about this in the beginning of Oros HaTshuva. If you're going to do something that's going to be opposite of the nature that God put into you, you're going to damage yourself and you're going to damage the whole world. The Rosh Hashanah created this taiva, and the guf that wants to just desire and desire and desire and desire and take as many women as it can or as many men as it can, the neshama comes in there with the tool called Torah mitzvahs and harnesses this desire and makes this desire a holy desire. It lifts up the guf. Catholics don't get it. So if you want to be a holy man, you can't get married and end up being whatever, a pedophile, or whatever you end up being in the Catholic Church. You can't change the teva. God wants you to take the teva and uplift it. God doesn't want you to take the teva and try to contradict him and say, well, I don't like the teva God created. I'm going to create a new teva. You can't create a new teva. The new teva is going to be, instead of desiring women, you're going to like little boys. You can't change the teva. And the Rebbe Shalom gave us the tools, the Torah mitzvahs, to take the mundane and lift it up. But we need to understand that the mundane needs to be lifted up. If it's just left by itself, the guf, to its own desires, it's going to just be a hunk of desire. It's going to be a taker, not a giver. So when the Ramchal here says that the guf itself is involved in low type of things and in embarrassing kind of things, we're talking guf qua guf. The guf just as the guf. The neshama is going to lift all the physical desires up. We're going to eat with a bracha. We're going to bench. We're going to get married with a kedusha. Harei at mikudeshesli. We're going to elevate the physical to be the spiritual. That's a tachlis which the neshama came to the guf. And therefore, unless you understand this, all man's toil while he's alive, all of man's toil under the sun, in other words, all of man's toil in this world, eina ella havel havolim. If you're just centered on your physical body and you just want to take and take and take and focus on your physical desires, the whole life is just hevel havolim. It's just a bunch of nonsense. And that's Koheles. Havel havolim ama Koheles. Havel havolim hakol havel. He said it 7 times. The life is a silly waste of time unless you understand what life is and how to lift up life. Otherwise, as I said in different shiurim, I'm going to finish this sentence and I'll mention what I was about to say. For those who say karbonis in the morning, it's in the siddur. What's really the difference between man and an animal if you live this way? Nothing. There's no difference. You want to eat and drink, be merry, you want to make a lot of money. If these things are disconnected from the neshama and disconnected to ruchnius, what you got is an animal. Animals like to eat, they like to drink, they like to sleep, they like to make a lot of money. And the way that people sometimes say they're so busy making money, they don't care if they step on other people. How many people did he step on to get where he got to? So we're dealing with cannibals. We're dealing with ishes ve'eu chayim below. People eat each other up to get ahead of the next guy. So we're living in the survival of the fittest. We're living in an animal universe instead of the universe of Ruchnius. Everyone is taking for themselves, and eventually if everyone's taking for themselves, there's going to be a fight over who's going to get the biggest piece. And in order to get the biggest piece, you got to knock off a couple of people. This is an animal way to live. And the end of such a life, the end of such a life is the Rambam says in Hilchas Tshuva, at the end of Hilchas Tshuva, that a person that doesn't get to Olam Haba, it means he died like an animal. So we have a story in the family. One of my sons won a hamster in school, and he named the hamster Sleepy. Wasn't it? And Sleepy was a pet for the family. Gave us some interesting times. And one morning, Sleepy was sleeping. Sleepy was asleep at the bottom of his cage. Sleepy died. My children, we had different pets. We went through different pets. My children, when we decided to do this, we buried the pets that died in the backyard in Baltimore. So Sleepy needed a burial, so we buried him in the backyard. Now Sleepy was a very nice pet. He was a very nice thing that the kids were able to play with and enjoy. But Sleepy's never going to be, Sleepy just, I can talk about Sleepy here and share, but Sleepy's never going to be heard from again. Sleepy's impact was he ate and drank in his little cage, went on that, whatever you call that thing that goes round and round and round. He kept on going round and round, like a lot of people, round and round and round they go, and they never really accomplish anything. They go in circles. And that was Sleepy's life, and every so often he gave the kids a good time. And then when he died. He's never going to be heard from again. No impact at all. And Lo Aleinu, a person that goes through life, eating, drinking, go on the, whatever, that wheel, going round and round, and really not doing anything. His neshama is not taking control of his guf. When such a person dies, okay, he dies. He decomposes in the ground. He's an animal. He died. He's never coming back again. We'll never hear from him again, chas v'sholom. So the Ramchal is saying that if you're going to live the life of a guf, that's where you're going to end up. You're going to sleep in the bed you made. If what you're going to do is run a life of guf, this dark, dense guf that's always a taker, when the time comes, after 120 years, that's what you're left with. And since after 120 years there's nothing to take, what are you going to take? You don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't drink, there's no women, there's no men. What are you going to do? There's nothing to do. So you just decompose and you finish, never to be heard from again. But if you lift up the guf through the work of the neshama on the guf, then there's a future to this existence. Klal Sheldova, the rule that I'm telling you is, the Ramchal says, Kol divrei hagashmius v'hateva los heim choshech v'lo or. All the physical things around us, without neshama to lift it. We're talking about gashmius qua gashmius. I eat for the sake of eating. I drink for the sake of drinking. That's what life is about. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you shall die. Choshech v'lo or. It's dark. There's no light to such a life. Masha Oni Baruch Hu Mastiponav Min Ha'olam Ve'nebeir Boy Ha'aretz Kedushosai Adarabba Manchein B'toyu Loiderech V'voram Shvolim Eile. That is one Hanhaga. That's Hanhagas Haguf, we'll call it now. Ach in Yonei Haruchnim, but the person's neshama, which is a Hanhaga, it's a trait of Ruchnius. That brings light into a person's life. And now you should know, we started this conversation today with the way God supervises the world and supervises man, and that God is a shadow of man. These two concepts I just explained to you, the neshama that comes from light and the guf that comes from the constriction, the tzimtzum of light, heim mostos hanhogas yisborach v'shorasha in kol bria. These two principles form the foundation of the two ways God supervises the world. Many times people say, oh, such terrible things are happening in the world. We're in a time of Hester Panim. What do we mean by that? Midas Hester Panim. There's a midah of Hester Panim. Shu mis'alam u'mistater ve'ena megala hader kavodo. You can't see God. It seems like God's not in the picture, chas v'sholom, umidas harspam. And sometimes God is clear. You can see God in everyday's events. So the same way, there's a neshama, and the neshama is light, and God created it from the light, and it lights up the world, and it's a giver. A person in his own life, if his neshama dominates the guf, he's going to bring neshama hanhoga to his life. It's going to be an exact mirror image. If you allow your neshama to dominate the guf and lift up the guf, that means you've selected neshama type lifestyle. Neshama type lifestyle means the lifestyle of or light over dense darkness. And therefore God will treat you and conduct his affairs with you in a way that brings light to you and not hidden darkness. So not all, and a passionate person does the opposite, and he lets the guf dominate, and he will bring guf hanhoga. He will bring the guf trait into his life. And the same way the guf is dark and dense, he will end up with a dark, dense kind of existence. So therefore, the Ramchal is explaining to us, and he's going to explain to us even in greater detail as we go into this. If you look at yourself, the Iyuv, the Pasuk in Iyuv says, "Mitzori echse Elokah." When I look at my flesh, I see God. It means when I look at my flesh, I look in the mirror and I understand I'm a physical body, and I believe I have a neshama. I now understand God to the extent I can. I can understand that God can either treat me in the physical, dense, dark way, which is my guf, if I allow the guf to dominate the neshama, chas v'sholom, or God can treat me in a way that's full of light and giving. Why? Because I myself in my life, I allow the neshama to dominate the guf. So when I take the steps for the neshama to dominate the guf, I'm telling God, God, I've selected neshama over guf, and God reacts to that and says, good, I'm going to give you light, neshama over guf, dense darkness. A person, chas v'sholom, allows the guf to dominate his neshama, so he's saying to God, I'm a guf person, I'm an offer person, I'm a dense dark person. I like the dense darkness of the guf. I enjoy it. I enjoy all these desires. I don't want to uplift anything. The Rosh Hashanah says, gesundheit, to live a guf life. And what I send to you is guf. I'll send to you darkness and density, and you will not be able to clearly see me, chas v'sholom. So those, man himself, the two component parts of man, guf and neshama, are replica images of the two major foundational ways that God actually runs the world. He runs the world through ha'oris panim, chas v'sholom, through hastoris panim. We should all be zayt to ha'oris panim.